My name is Michael, and for 10 years I believed my wife Catherine was the most honest person I'd ever known. She was a financial advisor at a prestigious firm downtown, known for her integrity and attention to detail. Our friends often joked that Catherine was so ethical she probably returned extra change at the grocery store. I used to laugh along, proud to be married to someone with such strong moral principles. I should have known that people who appear too perfect are usually hiding the biggest secrets of all. The unraveling began on a rainy Thursday in March. I was home with the flu, something I rarely got but which had knocked me flat for 3 days. Catherine had been taking care of me, bringing soup and checking my temperature, playing the role of the devoted wife perfectly. That morning she'd left for work as usual, kissing my forehead and telling me to rest. Around noon, feeling slightly better, I decided to tackle some paperwork that had been piling up on my desk. Among the stack of mail was a statement from a credit card company I didn't recognize, Capital Financial Services. The statement was addressed to Catherine M. Henderson, which was odd because Catherine's maiden name was Morrison, not Henderson. My first thought was that it was a mistake, mail meant for a previous tenant or a neighbor. But something made me open the envelope anyway. What I found inside made my fever-weakened hands start shaking. The statement showed charges totaling nearly $15,000 over the past 3 months. Hotel stays in cities I'd never heard Catherine mention visiting. Expensive dinners at restaurants in those same cities. Charges at jewelry stores, high-end clothing boutiques, and what appeared to be a car rental company. But it wasn't just the amount of money that shocked me, it was the pattern. The charges showed Catherine had been traveling extensively, staying in luxury hotels, and living a lifestyle that our combined income couldn't possibly support. And she'd been doing it all under a false name. I called the credit card company, claiming to be Catherine's husband and expressing concern about potential fraud. The customer service representative was initially hesitant to discuss the account, but when I provided Catherine's social security number and birth date, she became more cooperative. "Mr. Henderson," she said, "your wife has had this account with us for over 2 years. Her credit limit was recently increased to $50,000 based on her excellent payment history and the income documentation she provided." "What income documentation?" I asked, though I was beginning to fear the answer. "According to our records, Mrs. Henderson is the owner of Henderson Consulting, LLC, with an annual income of approximately $300,000. I hung up the phone in shock. Henderson Consulting didn't exist, at least not legitimately. Catherine had created a fake business entity to qualify for a high-limit credit card under a false name. But where was she getting the money to make the payments on such a large balance? Feeling sicker than I had from the flu, I began searching through our home office more systematically. Catherine had always handled our finances, claiming that her expertise made her better suited for managing our investments and bill payments. I'd been happy to let her take care of the money matters, trusting that she was doing what was best for our financial future. Hidden in the back of her filing cabinet, I found documents that revealed the scope of her deception. There were bank statements for accounts I'd never heard of, incorporation papers for Henderson Consulting LLC, and what appeared to be falsified financial documents showing inflated income and assets. But the most disturbing discovery was a manila folder labeled Client Files, that contained detailed information about elderly individuals, their names, addresses, social security numbers, and what appeared to be documentation of their financial assets and family situations. My hands were trembling as I realized what I was looking at. Catherine wasn't just cheating on our marriage, she was running some kind of elaborate financial fraud scheme targeting vulnerable senior citizens. One file in particular caught my attention. It belonged to Eleanor Whitman, an 83-year-old widow whose husband had left her a substantial inheritance. The file contained copies of Mrs. Whitman's bank statements, investment portfolios, and even personal information about her medical conditions and family relationships. Attached to Mrs. Whitman's financial information was a handwritten note in Catherine's neat script. "Lonely, no close family, beginning signs of memory issues. Perfect candidate. Trust established March 15th, initial transfer $75,000 scheduled for next week." I felt like I was going to be sick again, but this time it had nothing to do with the flu. My wife wasn't just stealing money from elderly people, she was targeting those who were most vulnerable due to loneliness and cognitive decline. As I continued reading through the files, a pattern emerged. Catherine had been identifying elderly clients through her legitimate work as a financial advisor, then approaching them privately with investment opportunities that didn't exist. She would gain their trust, often over months of careful cultivation, then convince them to transfer money into accounts she controlled. The sophistication of the scheme was breathtaking. Catherine had created multiple fake business entities, complete with professional websites and marketing materials. She'd established bank accounts under various names and had developed elaborate stories about investment opportunities in everything from real estate developments to technology startups. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect was how she'd been using the stolen money to fund an entirely separate life. The credit card statements and travel records showed that Catherine had been maintaining a relationship with someone named David Reeves in Seattle. The hotel charges, restaurant bills, and expensive purchases weren't just about fraud, they were about funding an affair. I found additional evidence of the affair in Catherine's email accounts, which I was able to access using passwords saved on our shared computer. The emails between Catherine and David painted a picture of a woman living a double life so complex it was almost impressive in its scope. David believed Catherine was a successful independent consultant who traveled frequently for work. He had no idea she was married to me or that her consulting business was actually an elaborate fraud scheme. In their correspondence, Catherine presented herself as a wealthy, sophisticated woman who could afford luxury travel and expensive gifts. But David wasn't just an innocent victim of Catherine's deception. He was also married, conducting his own affair while believing Catherine was single and available. The two of them had been planning a future together, discussing David's eventual divorce and their plans to relocate to somewhere exotic where they could start fresh. The emails revealed that Catherine had been promising David that she would soon have enough money saved to support both of them comfortably for the rest of their lives. She told him she was close to closing several major business deals that would set them up financially forever. Those business deals were actually the elderly victims she was defrauding. I spent the rest of the afternoon piecing together the timeline of Catherine's crimes. Over the past 18 months, she had stolen nearly $500,000 from at least 12 different victims. She'd been using the money to fund her travels to Seattle, maintain her relationship with David, and build up savings accounts that I'd never known existed. But Catherine's scheme was becoming increasingly risky. Some of her victims were beginning to ask questions about their missing money. Family members of others had started expressing concerns about unauthorized financial transactions. It was only a matter of time before someone reported her to the authorities. When Catherine came home that evening, I was sitting in our living room with all the evidence spread out on the coffee table. She walked in chatting cheerfully about her day, stopping mid-sentence when she saw the documents. "Michael," she said carefully, "you look like you're feeling better. I see you've been busy today." "Sit down, Catherine," I said. "We need to talk." For a moment I thought she might try to deny everything or claim that the documents were forgeries. Instead, she sat down across from me and looked at the evidence with what appeared to be resignation. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Since this afternoon. When I found the credit card statement for Catherine Henderson." She nodded slowly as if she'd been expecting this moment. "I suppose you want an explanation." "I want the truth," I said. "All of it." What Catherine told me over the next several hours was even more shocking than what I'd already discovered. Her fraud scheme had begun almost 3 years ago, not 18 months as I'd calculated. She'd started small, taking advantage of a few clients who'd asked her to manage investments outside of her official duties at the firm. "At first it really was legitimate," she explained. "I was helping them with investments that my company couldn't offer due to regulatory restrictions. But then I realized how trusting they were, how willing they were to give me access to their money without asking too many questions. The transition from legitimate financial management to outright theft had been gradual. Catherine would suggest slightly riskier investments with higher returns, then pocket a small percentage of the profits. When the investments performed well, everyone was happy. When they didn't, she would cover the losses with money from other clients. It was like a Ponzi scheme, she said, except I was the only one who knew it was a Ponzi scheme. The clients thought they were making money, and I was using new investments to pay returns to earlier investors. But Catherine had gotten greedy. Instead of being content with small percentages, she'd begun taking larger and larger amounts. She'd started creating entirely fake investment opportunities, collecting money from clients and depositing it directly into her own accounts. "When did David come into the picture?" I asked. Catherine's expression softened when she mentioned David's name, and I realized that her feelings for him were genuine, even if everything else about their relationship was built on lies. "I met him 2 years ago at a conference in Seattle," she said. "It was supposed to be just a work trip, but we connected in a way I'd never experienced before. He was everything you weren't: adventurous, spontaneous, willing to take risks." "So you decided to take risks with other people's money to impress him?" "It wasn't that simple," Catherine said, though her explanation made it sound exactly that simple. "David inspired me to want more from life. He talked about traveling the world, starting over in a new place, living without the constraints of conventional expectations. I wanted to be able to offer him that kind of life. Catherine explained that David had been pressuring her to leave me and move to Seattle permanently. He'd been planning to divorce his own wife and wanted Catherine to do the same so they could start fresh together. But David expected Catherine to contribute financially to their new life, believing she was wealthy enough to support them both. I kept telling him I needed more time to liquidate my business investments, Catherine said. But really, I needed more time to steal enough money to make his dreams come true. The scope of Catherine's deception was staggering. She'd been lying not just to me and to her victims, but also to David. She'd been lying to her employer about her outside business activities. She'd been lying to banks and credit card companies about her income and assets. She'd been lying to government agencies about her business entities and tax obligations. How much money have you stolen? I asked. About $600,000, she said quietly. Most of it is still accessible, sitting in accounts under various names. I was planning to transfer it all to offshore accounts next month, then disappear with David to somewhere without extradition treaties. $600,000. The number was so large I couldn't quite comprehend it. That money represented the life savings of elderly people who trusted Catherine to help them secure their financial futures. Instead, she'd been systematically robbing them to fund her fantasy life with another man. What about me? I asked. What about our marriage? Was any of it real? Catherine was quiet for a long time before answering. I did love you, Michael. I still do in some ways. But you represented safety and stability and predictability. David represents excitement and possibility and adventure. I guess I wanted both, and I convinced myself I could have both if I was careful enough. And the people you stole from? Did you ever think about what you were doing to them? I tried not to think about them, she admitted. I told myself they had more money than they needed, that they wouldn't miss what I was taking. I convinced myself that I was just borrowing the money, that I'd pay it back eventually once David and I were established somewhere else. But Catherine's victims weren't wealthy retirees with money to spare. Many of them were middle-class people whose savings represented their entire financial security. Some were widows and widowers who were depending on their investments to pay for medical care or nursing home expenses. Eleanor Whitman, the woman whose file I'd found, was living on a fixed income and had been planning to use her savings to move into an assisted living facility. Instead, Catherine had convinced her to invest $75,000 in a non-existent real estate development project. She's going to lose her house, I told Catherine. Mrs. Whitman trusted you to help her plan for her future, and instead you've destroyed her financial security. I know, Catherine said, tears finally starting to form in her eyes. I know what I've done is terrible. But I felt trapped, Michael. I felt like I was drowning in this life that didn't fit who I wanted to be. David offered me a way out, but that way out required money I didn't have. Over the following week, I struggled with what to do with the information I'd discovered. Part of me wanted to protect Catherine, to help her return the money and find a way to make things right without involving law enforcement. But I also knew that her crimes were too serious to handle privately. Catherine's victims deserved to know what had happened to their money. They deserved the chance to recover their losses and see justice done. And Catherine deserved to face consequences for the choices she'd made. But there was another complication I hadn't anticipated. David had been calling and texting Catherine constantly, wondering why she hadn't come to Seattle as planned and expressing concern about their future together. Catherine had been stalling, telling him she was dealing with unexpected business complications. He's getting suspicious, Catherine told me. He thinks I'm having second thoughts about leaving you. He doesn't understand why I can't just liquidate my assets and move on with our lives. Maybe you should tell him the truth, I suggested. Maybe you should explain that your assets don't actually exist and that you've been funding your relationship with him using stolen money. Catherine looked horrified at the suggestion. I can't tell him that. He would never understand. He thinks I'm successful and independent and financially secure. If he found out I was married and committing fraud, he'd never want to see me again. The irony was almost laughable. Catherine had been so concerned about maintaining her false image with David that she was willing to continue stealing from elderly people rather than risk disappointing him. She was more worried about losing her affair partner than about the damage she was doing to innocent victims. 2 weeks after my initial discovery, I made the decision to contact law enforcement. I called the Financial Crimes Division and arranged to meet with an agent who specialized in elder fraud cases. Agent Sarah Martinez was professional and compassionate, understanding both the difficulty of my situation and the urgency of stopping Catherine's crimes. "Mr. Thompson," Agent Martinez said during our initial meeting, "I want you to know that you're doing the right thing. Elder fraud is one of the fastest-growing crimes in the country, and the emotional damage to victims is often as devastating as the financial losses." I provided Agent Martinez with copies of all the documents I'd found, along with detailed explanations of Catherine's scheme. The agent was particularly interested in the fake business entities Catherine had created and the methods she'd used to gain her victims' trust. "Your wife's operation is more sophisticated than most," Agent Martinez explained. "She's been very careful about creating legitimate-looking documentation and maintaining professional relationships with her victims. This level of planning and execution suggests she's been thinking about this for a long time." The investigation moved quickly once law enforcement became involved. Within days, agents had frozen the accounts containing stolen money and had begun contacting Catherine's victims to inform them of the situation. The response from victims and their families was heartbreaking. Eleanor Whitman, the elderly widow whose file I'd found, had been planning to use her investment returns to pay for her late husband's final medical bills. When she learned that her money was gone, she broke down completely. "I trusted her," Mrs. Whitman told the agents through tears. "Catherine seemed so professional and caring. She said she understood what it was like to lose a spouse, and she promised to help me make smart decisions with my husband's life insurance money." Other victims had similar stories of misplaced trust and financial devastation. A retired teacher had invested his pension savings with Catherine, believing he was funding a technology startup that would provide income for his grandchildren's education. A widower with early-stage dementia had given Catherine access to his investment accounts, thinking she was helping him reorganize his finances for easier management. The human cost of Catherine's crimes was staggering. These weren't wealthy individuals who could afford to lose money, they were vulnerable people whose financial security had been their only protection against poverty and dependency in their final years. Catherine was arrested at her office on a Wednesday morning, taken into custody while meeting with a potential new victim. The arrest made local news, with reporters describing it as one of the largest elder fraud cases in the city's history. David called me that evening, having seen news reports about Catherine's arrest. He was confused and angry, demanding to know why I hadn't contacted him sooner to explain what was happening. "I had no idea Catherine was married," he said during our phone conversation. "She told me she was single and successful and ready to start a new life with me." "Are you telling me that everything she told me was a lie?" "Everything," I confirmed. "The business, the money, the ability to support both of you, all of it was based on fraud. She was stealing from elderly clients to pay for trips to see you and to build up savings for your future together." David was quiet for a long time before responding. "I feel like such an idiot," he said finally. "I was planning to leave my wife for her. I thought we were going to travel the world together, start over somewhere beautiful and exotic. I had no idea she was funding our relationship with stolen money." "Did you ever suspect anything?" I asked. "Did anything about her story seem too good to be true?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "She was always vague about the details of her business, and she never wanted me to visit her here or meet her friends. But I thought she was just being cautious about mixing business with pleasure. I never imagined she was hiding a husband and a criminal enterprise." David's wife had already filed for divorce, having discovered his affair through credit card records showing his trips and hotel expenses. His children were angry with him for cheating on their mother, and his professional reputation had been damaged by the publicity surrounding Catherine's arrest. "I've lost everything," David said. "My marriage, my relationship with my kids, my standing in my community. And it was all for a woman who never existed. The Catherine I fell in love with was completely fictional." The trial process was lengthy and emotionally draining. Catherine ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple counts of elder fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. She was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to her victims. During the sentencing hearing, several victims gave impact statements describing how Catherine's crimes had affected their lives. The testimonies were heartbreaking, revealing the full extent of the damage she had caused. "I trusted Mrs. Thompson because she seemed so professional and caring," said one victim. "She visited my home, met my family, and convinced me that she understood my financial needs. Instead, she was planning to steal my life savings the entire time." Catherine's own statement to the court was brief and seemed inadequate given the scope of her crimes. She apologized to her victims and expressed regret for her actions, but her words felt hollow compared to the real suffering she had caused. "I know that nothing I can say will undo the harm I've caused," she said. "I got caught up in a fantasy life and made terrible choices that hurt innocent people. I accept full responsibility for my actions and hope that someday my victims can forgive me. After Catherine was sentenced, I began the difficult process of rebuilding my own life. The publicity surrounding the case had made me something of a local celebrity, though not the kind of celebrity anyone would want to be. People recognized me as the husband who had turned in his criminal wife, and their reactions ranged from sympathy to suspicion about whether I had known about her crimes all along. I lost some friends who couldn't understand how I could have been so oblivious to Catherine's criminal activities. Others questioned whether I had been complicit in her scheme or had benefited from the stolen money. The scrutiny was exhausting and often unfair, but I understood that people were trying to make sense of a situation that seemed impossible to believe. The financial impact on our family was significant but manageable. Catherine had kept most of the stolen money separate from our joint accounts, so I wasn't directly implicated in her crimes. However, our shared assets were frozen during the investigation, and I had to hire lawyers to help sort out what belonged to whom. The emotional impact was much harder to quantify. I had lost not just my marriage, but my entire understanding of the person I had been married to. The Catherine I thought I knew, ethical, caring, devoted to helping others with their financial planning, had never really existed. The real Catherine was someone who could look elderly people in the eye while planning to steal their life savings. 6 months after Catherine's sentencing, I received a letter from Eleanor Whitman, the elderly widow whose file I had found in Catherine's papers. Mrs. Whitman had recovered most of her stolen money through the restitution process, but the emotional trauma of the experience had been devastating. Mr. Thompson, her letter read, I wanted to thank you for doing the right thing, even though it must have been incredibly difficult. If you hadn't found those documents and contacted the authorities, I would have lost everything. I know it couldn't have been easy to turn in your own wife, but your courage saved me and many other people from financial ruin. Letters like Mrs. Whitman's helped me understand that I had made the right choice, even though it had cost me my marriage and disrupted my entire life. Catherine's victims deserved justice, and they deserved the chance to recover their stolen money. My loyalty to Catherine couldn't outweigh my responsibility to the innocent people she had harmed. 2 years later, I'm in a much better place emotionally and financially. I've started dating again, though I'm much more cautious about trust and much more attentive to potential red flags. My new girlfriend, Jessica, knows the entire story of my marriage to Catherine and has been understanding about the trust issues I'm still working through. It must be hard to believe in people again after something like that, Jessica said during one of our early conversations about my past. It is, I admitted. But I've learned that most people aren't capable of the level of deception Catherine maintained. What she did required a particular kind of personality disorder that most people don't have. I've also become involved in advocacy work around elder fraud prevention, speaking at community events and helping law enforcement educate seniors about financial scams. The work is meaningful and helps me feel like something positive has come from the terrible experience of discovering my wife's crimes. Catherine and I have had no contact since her sentencing. She writes occasional letters from prison, but I don't read them. There's nothing she can say that would help me understand or forgive what she did. She made choices that destroyed multiple lives, including her own, and she has to live with the consequences of those choices. David moved away from Seattle after his divorce was finalized, relocating to a different state where he could start over without the baggage of his association with Catherine's crimes. He sent me a brief email apologizing for his role in breaking up my marriage, though I told him that Catherine's deception of him had been as complete as her deception of me. The most important lesson I learned from this experience is that people are capable of maintaining elaborate deceptions for years, even with those closest to them. Catherine's criminal behavior wasn't the result of a momentary lapse in judgment or a single bad decision. It was part of a pattern of manipulation and dishonesty that had probably been present throughout our entire marriage. I also learned that doing the right thing sometimes requires enormous personal sacrifice. Turning in Catherine meant ending my marriage, facing public scrutiny, and admitting that I had been completely fooled by someone I thought I knew better than anyone. But the alternative, allowing her to continue victimizing elderly people, was unthinkable. The credit card statement that started this whole revelation is still in my files, along with all the other evidence I found that day when I was homesick with the flu. Sometimes I look at those documents and wonder how different my life would be if I had never opened that envelope. But then I think about Eleanor Whitman and the other victims, and I know that I made the only choice I could live with. Catherine is eligible for parole in 6 years. I hope she uses her time in prison to genuinely understand the harm she caused and to develop the empathy and moral compass that were missing when she committed her crimes. But I also hope I never see her again. Some betrayals are too complete and too devastating to ever fully forgive or forget. The woman I married was a fiction, created by someone who was willing to destroy innocent lives to maintain her fantasies. The real Catherine was someone I never knew at all, and I'm not sure I would want to know her even now. Some discoveries change everything, and there's no going back to the way things were before you open that envelope and learn the truth. Thank you for listening to my story. If you had a similar experience, share it in the comments. And also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos.